I'm Heather Kelly, Extension Field Crops Plant Pathologist and IPM Coordinator for University of Tennessee, stationed here at the West Tennessee Ag Research and Extension Center. And today we're going to be talking about corn ear rots and mycotoxins and how to manage these. And really, to manage them though, you need to identify them first.
So Heather, before we get into identification, explain why corn ear rots are a significant pest here in Tennessee.
So corn ear rots can be a very significant pest. They are very dependent upon environmental conditions and the inoculum being present to become an issue. But essentially, they're different fungi that will colonize the ear and the kernels and essentially make them rot, leading to not only poor grain quality and lower yield and test weight, but some of these fungal pathogens can also create mycotoxins. And mycotoxins are toxic compounds that are produced by these fungal pathogens when the right environmental conditions occur. And these toxic compounds can be carcinogenic and are very much, can cause a lot of different issues for human and or animal consumption. And so again, that's an additional dock that one could be having to deal with when they go to take their grain to the elevator. And also, it's important too when you're storing grain to make sure you're identifying your corn ear rot, because that again is going to implicate what you need to do for harvesting. And while after you harvest and you store and dry your grain correctly, you're not going to reduce the amount of ear rot or the amount of mycotoxin that might already be present in that grain, but you can at least eliminate any additional ear rot or mycotoxin to develop once you've dried it down to the right moisture.
Are there certain ear rots that are more common here in Tennessee?
There are, and there's some that are just going to be more common and more significant. And so those would be your Aspergillus, Fusarium, Gibberella, and your Diplodia ear rots. And there are some less common and less significant ones that you might also run into, but we're going to focus on those four major ones today.
Do you have general, management tips for those?
Yeah, so in general, we'll go into a little bit more specifics on some of them, but in general, one of the big common things is to reduce plant stress. And so that means proper fertility management, proper planting density, as well as irrigating if possible when needed to reduce drought stress, as well as reducing and managing any damage by insects on those ears, because any damage by insects will just become entrances for those fungi to colonize and cause those ear rots. In addition to that, there are some hybrids out there that have some tolerance or are less susceptible to some of these ear rots. So if you know you've had a field previously with a certain ear rot in it, you're going back to it in corn, you definitely want to try to pick a hybrid that's either tolerant or less susceptible to that ear rot.
All right, let's dive deeper into each of these, starting with the first one, Aspergillus.
So Aspergillus, that is the actual name of the species of fungus that causes it. And what you'll see on an ear rot is yellow to olive green patches of spores on or between the kernels. And while any of the kernel can be infected, and you can see those symptoms, it usually begins at the tip of the kernel. And so with that, Aspergillus is one of our hot, dry, loving ear rots. But when we speak of when that is, it's most severe when you're under drought and hot, dry conditions during pollination and grain fill. And that's an area of concern, because we have had years in Tennessee where we do have very hot and dry conditions during pollination and grain fill. And again, depending on your hybrid and overall situation in the field, later on you might start to see some Aspergillus ear rot forming.
What sort of yield penalty do you get with Aspergillus?
So Aspergillus, again, it's going to reduce the overall weight of infected kernels. And while it's been hard to tease out the exact yield penalty of just Aspergillus because it is highly linked to very drought conditions. And so most of the time there is a penalty on your yield from just the drought conditions alone. But it'll definitely reduce your kernel weight, as well as then the resulting mycotoxin, which is the aflatoxin, is the most carcinogenic and highly toxic of the mycotoxins of our corn ear rots. And so with that, it can definitely, it's reducing the quality of your grain, and this aflatoxin can increase even after harvest if grain is not dried down below 15% moisture and stored in at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it is also the mycotoxin that has an action level threshold, and that's 20 parts per billion for human consumption. And that's actually, that is a very small amount. That is an action threshold level. That means either docking and or rejection of loads with that level of mycotoxin, of that aflatoxin in it.
What about management strategies for this particular ear rot?
And so this one, again, you're going to follow the same thing as our general recommendations. Again, if possible, to irrigate to reduce that stress. Again, reducing any additional stresses from nutrient, planting densities, or insect damage. The one thing you do actually have a product on the market, Afla Guard. And what it is it is a strain of the fungus, but it does not produce mycotoxin, and it's not as aggressive as our ear rot strains that are in the field. It does have to be applied before tassel to be effective, and what it's doing, it's a biological control. That strain of the fungus is going to colonize your ears is the goal, and so if a pathogenic strain comes in, one that would produce high levels of aflatoxin, what you put out there will outcompete that more virulent strain, and that way protecting, reducing ear rot, and reducing the amount of aflatoxin that could develop in your field.
The next is Fusarium kernel ear rot. How does that differ from Gibberellins?
So Fusarium ear rot, there's some similarities and some differences. So Fusarium, it's also going to like hot, dry conditions for development, but how it does differ is the symptom. Here you can see white cottony growth in between and on kernels, as well as it dries down, these kernels can turn tan to brown and have white streaks, which we call starburst pattern. And the starburst is very kind of iconic symptomology for the Fusarium kernel ear rot. Again, there's multiple species of Fusarium that can cause this, and so you want to be aware of that.
Discuss the yield penalty with Fusarium.
And so again, it's going to be making those kernels lighter in weight. It's going to be reducing yield, the grain quality. And again, fumonisin are the mycotoxin that these pathogens can create. And again, they're acutely toxic to animals, but especially pigs and horses. They can cause the blind stagger, different disorders in pigs and horses. And they've also been linked to increasing rates, cancer rates, and other human health problems. And so when thinking about, again, that it's multiple species of Fusarium, when we move on to management, these Fusarium species can be very present in seeds, plant debris, as well as secondary hosts, and here especially grasses. And so one of our regular rotations we use is wheat, and we do need to be careful. Wheat can host some of these pathogens, as well as even some of our other rotational crops. And so really trying to make sure you identify if you have this issue in your field. So going forward, you can try to find hybrids that have resistance when you go back to your field with corn.
We'll move on to Gibberella ear rot and talk a little bit about the symptoms that we would see with that one.
So Gibberella ear rot, we talk about it right after Fusarium because it actually is also a Fusarium species that causes this, previously called Gibberellizia, hence the common name Gibberella ear rot. But so this one, you're going to have a reddish mold appear usually at the tip, and then it grows down the ear. And in severe affections, that growth will actually colonize the ear so tightly that it will be hard to pull that husk back from that ear. Gibberella's favorable conditions are wet and cool, so opposite our Fusarium ear rot and our Aspergillus ear rot. And when we're talking about when is it cool and wet, we're talking about after the silking stage, when it can be infecting and starting to colonize. And even though that might be the initial stages of it, it can continue to develop in the ear all the way after R6 and until grain moisture is below 18%. And again, under extended periods of rainfall that delay the dry down, it can continue to increase and become more severe. And again, this is one of the ones, insect damage can definitely enhance the disease infection and increase its severity.
Why should producers be worried about this one in particular?
Again, it's going to cut their bottom line on overall yield and grain quality. It is one also that can produce a mycotoxin. And so here it's actually two different mycotoxins it can produce. Dawn or Vomitoxin is one. And both mycotoxins, both toxins are harmful, but in particular, those they've found that are contaminated with Dawn, animals may refuse to feed on that grain and or regurgitate it, as well as animals that do feed on it might have infertility issues and abortion issues, as well as other breeding issues. And so again, very important when thinking about if any of the corn is going for feed and or is being cut for silage.
Are there good management options for this ear rot?
There are, again, outside of the ones we've already talked about. This one, again, because it is a specific pathogen, Fusarium graminearum, that is the exact same major pathogen that can cause Fusarium head blight in wheat or head scab. And so again, the rotation of corn after wheat, you especially want to be mindful if you did have a lot of head scab in your wheat prior to you then going the next year or that following season in corn, you want to be mindful that you could have a buildup of this inoculum of the Fusarium graminearum causing Gibberella ear rot. And so really, as much as there might be some fungicides on the market labeled for ear rot, their efficacy has been limited, and really the preventative management is really where it still comes into play with this ear rot as well as the others.
And we'll finally discuss Diplodia ear rot. How do we identify that in the field?
So Diplodia ear rot, again, it's one where there's two different fungal species that can cause it. And these same two species can actually also be the agent for Diplodia stalk rot as well as the foliar disease Diplodia leaf streak. Just because you see the stalk rot or the foliar leaf streak doesn't mean you're going to have ear rot issues, but it is something to be aware of. And so that would be one thing to be on the lookout for ahead of seeing ear rot symptoms, is the stalk rot or the leaf streak symptoms. But you can observe these ear rot symptoms, kind of some of the earliest ones around R3 or milk stage. The infected husks are often bleached, while the rest of the plant is still green. And so the kernels will turn dull gray to brown, and the symptoms usually start at the base of the ear. And later on in the season, as it progresses, you might get black pycnidia, so it might look like black pepper flakes that are produced on the husks, kernels, cobs, and rotten stalks that are being affected by Diplodia ear rot. And so Diplodia ear rot is going to be similar to the Gibberella ear rot. It likes the wet conditions, so especially wet conditions during the silking stage, and then if then it's still continued by wet conditions into the fall and delayed harvest, really promote the most severe epidemics of Diploidea ear rot. And again, bird and insect damage to the ears will also predispose the plants to infection. And so these, again, the kernels will be lighter in weight, as well as they've been found to have reduced nutritional value. And so with that, also the lightweightness of the kernels and the cobs, when combining them, more of them can be ground up, resulting in higher levels of broken and foreign material, again reducing the grain quality of that harvest.
All right, and any mycotoxins with this one?
So this is the one of the 4 major ones that does not produce any mycotoxin. So that is the one good thing about Diploidea ear rot. But again, the same 2 pathogens can cause either the leaf streak symptom or the stalk rot symptom. So management for Diploidea ear rot, similar to the other ear rots, it can overwinter on debris of the previous corn crop. And so where applicable and where possible, tillage can be used, but if we can avoid that and definitely go with less susceptible or more tolerant hybrids, if having to go back to corn the same year or the next season, and as well as continuous good rotation to non-host crops will help reduce severity of Diploidea ear rot in coming years.
All right, and as we start to wrap up, just kind of go back and hit the highlights of each of these 4 diseases that we discussed, their symptoms and their conditions.
So, we have our first 2 that we talked about, Aspergillus and Fusarium ear rot or kernel rot. They both are our hot, dry loving ear rots. They do both produce mycotoxins, but the symptomology between the 2 is quite different. Where Aspergillus, you'll have that olive to green color start on the tip of the ear usually. That will indicate most likely you might have Aspergillus forming. Versus Fusarium, it can be sporadic throughout the ear. It's going to be more white, cottony growth. And then later you might see those starburst patterns on the kernels there for Fusarium ear rot. And then we have our Gibberella and our Diploidea ear rot. These 2 are our cooler, wet-loving ear rot pathogens. And so the difference again there, though, you have your Gibberella ear rot that does cause a mycotoxin. But again, it's going to usually start at the tip of the ear with a reddish mold and grow downward, where Diploidea, you're going to have more grayish to brown mycelium and overall a bleach out of the entire kernel, where it starts usually at the base of the ear and works its way up. And so again, the Diploidea ear rot is the one of the 4 that actually does not create a mycotoxin. But again, the 2 pathogens that can cause it can cause stalk rot and or leaf Diploidea leaf streak. With all of these, anytime you can reduce plant stress, and so a lot of preventative management, that means making sure you have proper fertility, plant population out there, irrigation when needed, as well as then also managing your insects that could be feeding on your ears and or even in the stalk and causing stress on the plant. Additionally, proper crop rotation and or tillage when needed to reduce that inoculum that's coming out of the field from previous seasons. And as well as always looking at the genetics of the hybrid you pick to see if you can find a good hybrid out there that has either less susceptibility or more tolerance to any of the ear rots you might have found in your field previously. And then when you have identified what ear rot you have, you need to understand what mycotoxin may or may not be created. For silage and harvested grain that you know have ear rots, again, you want to target those fields to harvest them first, and you want to dry them down as quickly as possible to 15% moisture. That will stop the continuation of the ear rots or ear molds from continuing, as well as stopping any mycotoxin production. What has occurred in the field will still be there, but we don't want it to continue after harvest. And that's why it's very important to get that moisture down as quick as possible. And if you're going to long-term store the grain, you want to make sure you get it down all the way to 13% moisture to again reduce any chances of continuation of the ear molds and the mycotoxin development. So as always, UT Crops, we have a lot of different resources you can access now, including our guide.utcrops.com. This is our mobile-friendly field guides. So if you have an ear rot out there, a foliar disease, or even an insect you're not sure if it's good or bad or what you need to do, you can check out our field guide. Again, that's guide.utcrops.com. For in-season, up-to-date what's going on right now, we have our news blog article at news.utcrops.com. Those same blogs actually also go out on Twitter. If you are someone on Twitter, you can follow us and it's at utcrops.com, or I'm sorry, just at utcrops is our Twitter handle. And then also, as we talked about a lot about hybrid selection, we have a database that's always improving. Our goal is to have it to be a fully searchable database, but all of our variety trials and all the data we collect from it can be found at search.utcrops.com. And then lastly, somewhat of a home base that you could access the other 3 sites from is our utcrops.com just home base that has a lot of extension publications and agronomic guides, as well as other resources for you.